Can I be very brief so that we can have a discussion? Because I'd like to hear what's on people's minds and also questions. I'm following events, I'd say hour by hour, and trying to understand what's happening in a complex situation where we're not told the truth on most things. So you have to figure out what's going on because no one's going to tell you, and maybe last of all, the New York Times. So it's a real problem to understand this crisis. Let me basically say at the start that we're on an extraordinarily dangerous path of escalation between Russia and the United States. And the war in Ukraine is largely, in my opinion, a proxy war. It's Ukrainians fighting and dying. It's American weapon systems, intelligence, so-called officials, strategists, tactical finance that is backing this war. So this is, to all effects and purposes, a war between the US and Russia, though fought in a proxy way so far. Our goal, we're told from the US side, is to defeat Russia and force it to leave Ukraine after what is described as an unprovoked invasion on February 24th. I think there were lots of provocations, so the situation's more complicated, but let me just start with the desired outcome. I don't understand it. I don't understand how it could conceivably be achieved. We think that weapon systems and sanctions and fighting will wear down Putin or get him overthrown, and something will change and Russia will go home because they realize that this is not worth it for them. And maybe the US model, and by US, I don't mean us, the American people, we have no part in any of this. The model of those who are prosecuting the US side of this is that it's like Afghanistan or Vietnam was for the United States, that after it gets sufficiently bloody and useless, you just go home. I think there's a huge difference, which is that from Putin's perspective, but I think it's more general than that. It's not just one person. From the perspective of the Russian political actors and elites, the situation in Ukraine is not like America in Vietnam or America in Afghanistan. It's exactly in the neighborhood. And so it's viewed in Russia, I think, I'm not sure, but I think in much, much starker terms, that we will not lose this war because this is a war about Russian security. That's the Russian view. Okay, you could say they're crazy, not crazy, but I think that's the Russian view. And if that's the Russian view, and our view is we're going to defeat Russia, and Russia's view is we're not going to be defeated, I don't understand what anybody really has in mind other than continued escalation. And it is shocking but not surprising that every day now we have stories, will he or won't he use nuclear weapons? As if this is just another casual story in some newspaper column, as opposed to the existential threat to our survival, which it is. So I believe we don't have a plan. I don't think we have a strategy. We want to defeat Russia, and yet Russia doesn't want to be defeated. And even if we could, which I have my doubts about, defeat Russia on conventional weapons basis, Russia has 1,600 active nuclear warheads. and 6,000 warheads in total. So I don't understand what our idea is. And again, when I speak of our, it's not mine, it's not yours, I think. It's our government's. And I don't even know who's really responsible for this, but it's a very narrow group and it has almost nothing to do with the American people, and no one's been asked about it, and no one's been informed about it, and no one's been told about it. And yet here we are near the brink of nuclear war. And we are near the brink of nuclear war. That's true. So to my mind, we are in a wildly wrong-headed approach. Oh, how did we get here? Again, this is much contested. There are two very different narratives. One narrative is Putin is, has delusions of grandeur and thinks he's Peter the Great and he's going to recreate the Russian Empire. That's the American story we're told all the time. I have a very different view, which is that we got here because the United States just can't keep its goddamn nose out of anyone's backyard. And we kept pushing NATO enlargement. And I was there 32 years ago as advisor to Gorbachev, and then advisor to Yeltsin, and advisor to Kuchma, first president of independent Ukraine. And I was an advisor to Yatsenyuk just after the 2014 events. So I've watched this pretty close up for 32 years. And I think the US is the provocation. This does not play well in the US media. In fact, it doesn't play at all. I can't get an op-ed published in the US media. They're not interested. They don't want to have any debate at all. So I think it is absolutely true, by the way, that the US and Germany told Gorbachev in 1990. Gorbachev offered, by the way, to disband the Warsaw Pact. That came from Gorbachev. We said, if you disband the Warsaw Pact, we will not use the occasion to move NATO to the east. And that became a condition, actually, for German reunification. And it was absolutely explicit. Now, since our government lies about everything, the narrative is, oh, we never promised, which is not true. And there's a whole vast documentary record of the US promising no enlargement. Well, of course, as soon as the Soviet Union went away, we thought it was a juicy opportunity to enlarge NATO, and started with Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, 1999, and then George W. Bush Jr. added 7 more countries, 3 in the Baltics, so 3 right on Russia's border, Bulgaria and Romania, which is Russia's Black Sea region, and Slovakia and Slovenia. And we continue NATO expansion. And in 2008, Bush said, now we'll go to Ukraine and to Georgia. And to my mind, this was just absolutely the most provocative thing we could do. Because now we're pushing NATO right up against Russia's core security concerns. And the Europeans, many European leaders told me in 2008 how dangerous this was and how much they were against it, but the US calls the shots. So, ladies and gentlemen, to my mind, we've been stirring the pot the whole time. And there are many complications to this story, so I could talk for hours about the details. But in 2014, the pro-Russian president was overthrown. The US narrative is it was a mass public upheaval against a corrupt president. And I was there on the ground soon afterwards, and I know that the US played a direct role in the overthrow. And the Russians call it a coup. So we have competing narratives, but the Russians say, look, you overthrew the president friendly to our country. We don't want you anywhere close to our borders. At the end of 2021, Putin put forward security demands to the White House. at the core of them was don't expand NATO. I called the White House at the end of 2021 to beg them, negotiate. We shouldn't be expanding NATO anyway, negotiate. And I was told, no, we have an open door policy, which means that anyone that wants to join NATO can join NATO. And I said, that's crazy. This isn't a right, this is a threat to another country. This isn't about rights, this is about the effects on the neighbors. And I said, do you believe that Mexico has the right to have a military alliance with China? I don't think so. But that's what you say about Ukraine, that they have the right to have a military alliance with the United States. I said, in any event, they can ask, but it's not prudent for us to do it. Well, the White House refused any negotiations. And then there are competing stories, and I won't go into all the details, but Putin invaded on February 24th, and we've been escalating ever since. And the last week has been filled with news stories, these casual stories of will he or won't he use nuclear weapons, as if, we're trying to predict the outcome of the Super Bowl. It's bizarre to me. I've just never seen anything so reckless. And I have no confidence in the US government, no confidence in what we're doing to head this off, because they're dead set on doing whatever it takes. That's what they say all the time, whatever it takes to win this, for Ukraine to win this war. And since I don't think Russia's going to lose this war, short of nuclear war, to my mind, we're on a recipe of continued escalation. And I'll stop with the reading. I want to read you one set of words from my favorite speech of modern times by an American president, which is President John F. Kennedy's speech on June 10, 1963. And just to give background about this, I wrote a book about this speech because I love it so much. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy and Khrushchev knew the world's insane. We can't go on this way. We're going to blow everything up. We need to find a way to peace. And Kennedy gave this speech on June 10, 1963, to convince Americans that it was possible to make peace with the Soviet Union, which was not a conventional view. How can you make peace with the commies? And Kennedy said, we have to check our own attitudes. They're human beings. They have the same desires as we do, and they want to live in peace also. And so if the agreement is mutually satisfactory, it can be mutually observed. Very, very wise words by President Kennedy. And the whole speech is completely wonderful. And I've driven my family crazy for years by making them listen to it on multiple occasions. Especially when I was writing the book, they had to listen to it 10 times at least. But in any event, Kennedy said something that I really, really want to emphasize. He said, and it's the most important statement for this moment. He said, above all, while defending our own vital interests, nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age would be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish for the world. So what Kennedy is saying is, you never, with a nuclear adversary, make them choose between a humiliating defeat and a nuclear war. But that's exactly what we're proposing to do right now with Putin. Not only that, every day Zelensky tries to humiliate Putin, not tries to solve a problem, but to humiliate Putin. Maybe, of course, he's rallying his supporters, but we get closer and closer to the precipice. I can't stand listening to Zelensky, I'm telling you, because maybe I can understand, although I don't really understand. If I were next door to Russia, I'd have a different language, because I wouldn't want to be nuked either. But what he's doing in terms of provocation is extremely dangerous, and we're playing the game because we're saying whatever they do, that's all right. They have to win. I believe that they're the ones shelling the nuclear power plant. I'm absolutely almost sure that it's Ukraine shelling the power plant. Our papers say we don't know who's doing it, but since Russia controls the plant and Ukraine wants to win it back, I think Ukraine is shelling the nuclear power plant. I think, by the way, just to add to the discussion, that we are the ones that blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. I'm pretty sure that was a U.S. action. When I said it on television a couple of days ago, they cut me up. They took me off the air immediately because you're not allowed to say this on U.S. television. But it's pretty much conventional wisdom in other parts of the world, even by reporters that don't write it in their paper. If you talk to them privately, they say, of course it's the U.S. Who else would do it? Who else could do it? Who else had an incentive to do it? So let me stop there. It's so dangerous. We have no debate in this country, in Congress or any place else. They're not asking us to be part of this discussion, even though it's our lives on the line and our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives. New York City is extraordinarily vulnerable, I don't have to mention. And our congressmen aren't saying boo. So one thing I'd love for us to do is reach the New York delegation to just say, this is reckless. Stop it. We're in the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis this month. We don't want to replay it. And we would never have survived it had it not been for Kennedy in that position, because if it had been any of his advisors, the world would have been destroyed. But he was smart enough not to destroy the world. So let me stop there and turn it over and open for discussion. Thanks a lot.